It has been a very tough year for investors. In fact, in his recent interview with Raul, Christoph Allari says that in his 30 years in the investment business, 2022 has been the worst he's ever seen. Most people have a tendency to check out as the holiday season approaches, probably this year more than ever. But we want to help you get your portfolio in order for 2023. In this new mini-series, we'll explore the psychology behind leaving things to start fresh in the new year and how you can avoid that. Plus, we'll look forward to next year and help you get ahead of the curve and take advantage of opportunities when January 1st rolls around. In this first episode, Maggie Lake speaks to renowned Wall Street coach Denise Shull about why we wait until January. Her coaching framework uses neuroscience and psychological research to help investors and traders gain an edge.
So, Denise, we noticed that as we come into the final stretch of the year, that there's a tendency for people to just check out. Like they just go on autopilot, no matter what's going on around them. And when we were looking at that, especially this year, because there feels like there's a lot of important things going on, and we have people talking about the fact that we could be in a paradigm shift, and there's all this stuff we should be paying attention to. Why does that happen? Why do we get that sort of year-end blowout where people just mentally turn off?
Well, in broad strokes, it's one of two things. Either you've done well and you don't want to give any back. This is in markets per se. Or you haven't done well and you just want to give up and start over. And I have clients on sort of both sides of those equations. More on the done well and don't want to give any back. But the brain's always predicting. And so we're really always in the future anyway. And I think once the future starts to get close, you start to think about it more than the here and now, like almost as a natural way your brain works.
Which is interesting because I think that's kind of the opposite of what I think of. This is of what I was thinking, or I kind of thought, maybe everybody just wants to sort of focus on the present and close out the future because they're quite literally thinking about, the holidays and presents and having a good time. And they don't want to somehow that stresses them out. And it's kind of ostrich in the sand type of put your head in the sand type of thing. But that's interesting. You say we actually are thinking about the future.
Like literally the latest brain science is everything we do is a prediction about how it's going to feel in the future. So, but how far in the future, right? Like it could be all different points in the future. So, I think it's kind of both. Like whether you say you want to check out or you say you want to maintain your P&L, like you don't want to mess it up, or you don't want to mess up whatever your year end, anything else, sales, whatever. And then you say, well, and then I can relax, enjoy the holidays, then I can get a break. I'm tired. I feel burnt out. I don't want to take on anything more. We just don't have that much ambition. Now, I also think there literally is a physical seasonal thing to it, at least in the Northern Hemisphere where nature shuts down. And so we tend to shut down, to hibernate, to go dormant. And, then we have the winter equinox and the sun starts staying up longer. Here's a crazy little thing that I learned from a friend of mine who's like a biology teacher. You can see on January 1st, which is only 9 days after the shortest day of the year, you can see plants with buds on them if you look really carefully, even in cold places like Massachusetts, because there's just that slightly more sun. So there's something about the way the earth moves at that time of year and that we're going into that time of year now, right? Where things just want to go dormant, regroup, and restart.
That's so interesting. It makes sense. You mentioned burnout, and I think that's really important right now as well, because I feel like, I don't know, we probably have always felt like this. Maybe we're just talking about it more, but it's just been a lot, right? People rolled out of COVID and then they're dealing with being out of COVID. If in some parts not, some of our viewers are still in it. So it's uneven. And then people had to readjust. And there's been all this volatility in markets for people, investors. Every time you turn around, there's just been a lot. And so does it feel like you're hearing about burnout more?
I wish I could pick up my phone and read a message I got from a client of mine today at a big, hedge fund that everyone knows. Like, I'm done. I've had it. I can't stand this one more second. Like, I worked too hard and I gave back more money this week. Like, and even me, and I hardly ever feel like this. I could use a break.
Yeah.
The last 2 times we came through this time of the year, we were basically all still working from home. Maybe last year sort of, a little bit less obviously than the year before. But getting back into the traveling on a regular basis, like it's tiring, and we all escaped that for a good period of time.
Does it help to understand why we're feeling burnt out so that we can, because I think for some people it's hard for them to put a finger on what exactly it is that's making them feel like they just want to pull the covers back over their heads.
Yeah. Well, I mean, answering the question, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it, and answering it accurately is like a superpower skill. Mm-hmm. So that's always true. We have a tendency to get it wrong, on both sides, both the what and the why. There's this crazy thing that happens when we get the why part right, even if it's bad, even if it's like, in the circumstance, like, I hate my job, I'm going to have to quit, like, life's going to be upheaval, whatever. I'm just pulling that off the top of my head. When you know the why, it feels better, feels less onerous. So, and then you get like your mind opens up as to, okay, what could I do about whatever this problem is that's like aggravating or depressing?
Yeah, you go from that sort of, that dread, the unnamed dread that just hangs over you, which I think everyone has experienced that. When it does in your experience, because I know you talk to a lot of your clients are, in addition, they cut across all industries and athletes and all that sort of stuff, but you do talk to a lot of people in investing. Do these kind of markets make it harder? I mean, we've had a lot of people say to us, oh, well, this is new. It's not new if you've been around for a long time, but there are a whole bunch of people who've never experienced volatility like this. They've never experienced higher interest rates. They've never experienced a real bear market. We've kind of been in this sort of placebo, easy money, big rallies all the time type environment. So this is tougher sledding. Are you hearing is it a lot harder in that environment?
Oh, I totally think it is. Like this client I got, sort of the doomsday text from an hour or so ago. He's 32.
Wow. So
I can't say, well, think back to 2001 and the first part of 2002. Yeah. Like it was never going to end, like tech stocks were all going to go bankrupt and who knows what was going to happen after that. Like he doesn't, I remember it really clearly. I remember feeling then, like I think they feel now.
Yeah.
Because I'd been in the markets like 94 to 2000. So I'd experienced that like raging bull market and then being so mystified and confused and frustrated. And now I'm like, just like 2000, 2002.
We'll survive.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's tradable. It's tradable as long as you're not constantly looking for a bottom.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting that you're seeing that play. I mean, I think we suspect that, but it's interesting to hear them layered on that and coming out of COVID and the reintroduction of travel and socialization and seeing people in person and having to answer to clients in person in some cases who are pissed that you're losing money. I mean, that's a whole kind of snowball of hell.
I have a client who works for one of those huge, like, $1 trillion asset managers, that has mutual funds and hedge funds. And he told me a couple of weeks ago, he goes, I have never had more client meetings ever. Like, it's all I've done for 3 straight weeks. And some of them were coming. He happens to be in London. Some of them were coming to London to see him. Some of them were video. But he's like, it's just one after another. It's never, ever, ever, ever been like that before.
So if we're in this...
And in this market... Then you have to answer for like, not having a great year because, people having great years are few and far between.
And I think for some people too, there's been, even if they have experience, things have kind of been moving in strange ways that, either everything's selling off or everything in the correlations that used to be there to give you some kind of roadmap seem to have temporarily, at least, who knows, disconnected. And so that kind of leaves you in uncharted territory as well, which I'm sure can't help that level. So what kind of things can we do to kind of mentally prepare ourselves for the new year, or at least plug in? Because it seems like checking out will only, and just not thinking about it's only going to pile up, right? It's not going to necessarily clear. So are there ways that we can kind of chip away and maybe make sure we're more present to try to deal with this?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is be willing to like accept however you feel, which people aren't. Like, that's a really simple thing for me, but they're really not. Most people may feel something unpleasant, whatever, annoyance, burnout, frustrated, whatever. And they don't want to feel it because it's not any fun. So they try not to feel it. So what usually happens is it just grows, like it just gets bigger. Because underneath there's some message, there's some piece of information in any so-called negative feeling, meaning so-called, so unpleasant feeling. And then you go back to like, okay, if you really figure it out, whatever it is, because it's going to be all kinds of different answers, right? I have a client who's done okay, but he was like waiting for this kind of market. And so he's really mad at himself for not doing great. So it's going to be like exactly why you feel lousy. It's going to be different person to person. You've got to have the courage to feel it and understand it. Because if you do, it gets better. And then generally speaking, you tend to get a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more energized. So then you feel like thinking, okay, what do I want to happen in 2023? And how do I make that happen? And what can I do to prepare for that now? If I wasn't so burnt out, I was actually going to give a class around this in December, but I can't do it. Like literally, because people are trading in the market should really take the time to understand their typical patterns. Everybody should know their average winner and their average loser, and the time they hold their winners and the time they hold their losers. Unless you work for a company that gives that to you, you don't know it. But holiday markets are a great time. You can still be sort of looking at the screen like the week of Thanksgiving while you're literally working on analyzing your own statistics. And then people also tend not to have accurate data unless it's given to them by a company. Like, they don't really know. They just don't know.
Which is probably surprising to a lot of people.
Well, people also don't want to know.
That's what I was wondering. Do we really want to analyze ourselves and our performance? Do we really want to sort of like face the reality?
A lot of people think it's going to be worse. And for some subset of the population, it's worse. For most, relatively high performing professional people, it's better than they think. Because we're all a little bit anxious and a little bit self-critical, right? And so, like, this used to happen to me with my trading all the time. Like, I'd be beating myself up for something, and then I would do this on the weekend, and it was like one trade. So one trade is one bad decision out of maybe, at that time I was doing maybe 50 trades a week. Well, I mean, even back when I was at Schoenfeld, and they would give us these reports, and this was when stocks traded in eighths, how many times you made an eighth, lost an eighth, quarter, et cetera, throughout the month. And I'd see those two 7/8 losers and be like, those are the ones that kill. I mean, they made the difference between okay and good, and people just, I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm going to say 65% of us fall in that category. It's probably actually higher.
I would say the same exact thing about speaking in public. People come back and say, it was horrible. It was horrible. I didn't make any sense. I tripped over myself. And then you go back and look and, okay, maybe they, lost their train of thought or got off track one time. But the rest of the 30 minutes was amazingly clear and fantastic. And all they do is focus on that one thing that they think they didn't express themselves properly. So I'm with you. I think it's high. I think it's a lot higher than that.
It's good to find out that the truth of your performance isn't as bad as you feel like it is. Because then you're actually working from more. First of all, you feel better, and that'll make you feel more optimistic. But you're actually working, whatever then you do actually want to get better about, you're working from an accurate baseline. Because if you're not, you're solving the wrong problem.
There's that old cliche, the truth hurts, but actually maybe the truth that makes you feel better if your recollection of it wasn't accurate.
I mean, we live in a culture that has a tendency to chastise.
Yeah.
Has a tendency to assume people aren't working hard enough. I mean, even behavioral finance, you're making all these mental mistakes and you can't help it. It's not really true. It's not actually really true. But we all are kind of, it doesn't really help. Like the haranguing of ourselves or of each other for that matter is generally not that helpful.
No, it's not, because it doesn't change the facts. It just hurts your will to move forward, I guess.
Which it makes me want to, go on one of my rants about positive thinking.
It just occurred to me when we started this, as you're describing that mental process of kind of looking at really examining what's going on and why you are, like what you are feeling and why you're feeling it. We were talking about checking out or tuning out. It almost in some ways also can be kind of paralyzed. I mean, some people, that may be a more accurate description of what some people are doing, because checking out or tuning out, especially tuning out, seems like, okay, I'm just not going to pay attention because I'm going to do other things. And we have a tendency to think they're positive. That's what I came into this discussion thinking. They're going to check out because they want to hang out and have a good time. But actually, maybe they're not. Maybe it's not that much of a choice. Maybe it's more of a state of paralysis of, not understanding what's happening and why it's happening, and that leading to some fearful thing about the future.
Well, it just gets the frustration gets overwhelming. And in order to cope, you've got to escape like the source of the frustration. And that's definitely my client from the name brand hedge fund. There's such a thing as a name brand hedge fund.
I think there is. I like that.
Well, in our world there is, but he just needs a break from the difficulty of this year's market. And I mean, he's incredibly high performing, incredibly self-critical. Like, then he works himself like way too many hours, but he literally he just doesn't even care about his P&L right now. Like, he just whatever, it's sort of like make it stop. Just make it stop.
That's a painful spot to be, though. I hate hearing that. It just doesn't sound like anybody, a human being, should be in that situation.
Well, I mean, this is going off into a whole other podcast, but, people have repetitive scenarios, right? And we have these expectations of that things are going to turn out according to our storyline. So this person has like a difficult storyline from high school that was a set of insurmountable circumstances. And so when he loses money, he reverts into this, there's nothing I can do. Like, this problem will never be solved. And he cognitively knows it, but he won't emotionally work with it. He just sticks in, the world's ending. It's terrible. I don't care. And he's not yet willing to maybe some of that feeling is like a story that I experienced earlier.
Yeah, those stories are powerful. Those early stories, aren't they? I mean, they are hard to shake.
Well, it's just the way the brain works. We learn and absorb who we are in the world and how things are going to turn out for us. Particularly in our first 5 or 10 years, but definitely in the first 20. And then we become adults and we don't know it, but we're expecting the same story. It's literally the brain's efficiency to absorb the world and then have these predictions. So then the trick is to use your intellect in adulthood to separate that out. Just because that happened to me doesn't mean it has to happen to me again, but you have to even be willing to see it for what it is. Again, we're back to understand the problem for what it actually is your best foundation to solve it.
I feel like there are people who kind of take that time to take stock. That's the opposite of checking out, right? Of sort of take stock, think about it, sort of sit in that moment of looking at whatever it is that's spread in front of you, whether it's your 401 or your plan for next year or your career options as you enter into the next year, whatever it is that the debt you want to pay down, and sort of take stock and try to come up with a plan. Those sound like people who are willing to face the what, maybe identify the why, as opposed to the checkout people.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, if I think about my clients, despite the fact that one guy wants to check out, I can guarantee you he will do market work this week and he will move positions around on Monday. I mean, I have a client, in a long only $12 billion fund. And I was talking to him a couple of weeks ago, and they've been mediocre. Let's just call it mediocre. Basically, because they were in China. That's a reasonable allocation to China. And he was sort of like, okay, but like we can just like, it's going to be okay. Our investors are going to understand this 1 year, like, but next year. And I said, well, the market's volatile. It's probably going to be volatile through the end of the year. So like, what could be done to make a little bit of money between? And we were on Zoom, and he was like, well, that's an interesting question. Like, it was so obvious to me that, well, it seems like we should probably try to make some money between now and year end. And it was like, and he literally was like, well, I guess we actually could do that if we tried.
Well, because he was in the narrative, right? He was stuck in the narrative of the year sucked. It's a write-off. It's unsalvageable. Even though the year's not out, he had already sort of married himself to that narrative.
Yeah. And I'm always doing this with my clients. Like, okay, let's take a lot of them have 40, 50, 60 positions. Like, what are the ones you have the least conviction in? What are the ones, I mean, you say you like them all, but if you have to rank them 1 to 60, let's just say, like some of them you don't like as well as others. And some of them you actually do really like. Like, why not just get rid of the ones that are relatively you don't like and add to the ones you do like? Like, maybe you won't make a bunch of money by doing that, but you might make a little money.
Yeah.
And you won't be like the mosquito bites of the ones that like you're keeping because you don't want to disappoint an analyst or whatever, like because you think it might come back in 2024.
Yeah. The why we're, why are you keeping them and being, you said something before that was, I think, really, really interesting and really important. And that is, you can intellectually understand something, but you haven't emotionally dealt with it yet. That's pretty powerful. Because I think that a lot of us think about these things and we're like, well, we know that. I know that this is an issue, or I know I've done that before. But emotionally, taking ownership, that's different.
Human beings run on emotion. But, somewhere in the Greeks and then the European philosophers, we were told we don't. We were told that intellect is the thing because we have this intellect that can do these cool things. But it's not true. It's just not true. Like, every decision's got an emotion in it. Every decision has the prediction of an emotion in it. The way to change your patterns is to understand the emotional narrative, and to feel them and associate the emotions with where the narrative came from. So you're not like, I think the evolutionary purpose of repeating it is to help you stop doing it. The point of negative emotions is to get your attention, but we live in this culture of like, don't have any negative emotions because it's gonna so we're like missing the value. By the way, we're also exacerbating the mental health crisis by doing that. Because like at their core, every one of those negative, unpleasant feelings is meant to give you some piece of information. Like fear, okay, there's something you need to be careful about. Frustration, there's something that's wrong. Disappointment, why didn't that work out? Like there's a piece of information down the rabbit hole of each one of those feelings. But we're not allowed to feel any of them. And we don't actually know how. And what people don't know is like, you can be, let's say you're really frustrated with this year and you just want the frustration to be over. So you're checking out. You'd be shocked that you could sit down on a Saturday afternoon with a notebook and like feel the frustration and write about what it's really about. And you're not going to be eaten alive by it. You think you are. It feels like if you allow yourself to sit in that feeling, it's going to like consume you. It does the opposite. You actually get information and you come out the other side of that process in a better, more optimistic place. Like, okay, I am going to solve this problem, My mind is racing right now because that is not only relevant to everything we're talking about, trying to steer your financial future, but like across everything in life. I'm thinking right now of like 3 scenarios I just saw play out, not even involving me, and people's reactions. I know we're not exactly related to what was going on. The sort of emotion behind what they did and how they reacted is about something else. And I feel like if they faced what that was, then these things wouldn't repeat and they wouldn't be so stressful. And that just blows my mind, the thought of that. Well, people are taught not to have those emotions. And then they think they have to suppress them, particularly in a corporate environment. So the emotion's going to win. So they act it out in some way, shape, or form, often distorted and often, or maybe even always, counterproductive, as opposed to like having the emotion, sitting with it, analyzing it, understand what its core meaning is to you, and choosing a way to address whatever that core meaning is. Then you can behave. You can be upset in some way, shape, or form, but you can have chosen a productive alternative. But there's so much pressure. When I was giving an interview the other day to a founders magazine, and I just jokingly said, like, I wonder how many positive thinking messages there are on Instagram in any one given hour. If you took the entirety of Instagram, literally how many millions of messages that says you have to be confident, you have to feel happy, you have to feel good, or else bad things are going to happen. And like, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And what's going on out there, let's get on my soapbox, but I guess I'm already on it.
Get on that soapbox, Denise. I love that soapbox.
Like, it literally is like everyone knows we have a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And at its core, it's because nobody's allowed to have their negative feelings. Because right now, there's all this pressure to be positive.
Yeah.
So there's nobody, you can't really talk to your friends, or you can't really admit to feeling fear, frustration, anger, disappointment, because you're not supposed to. And it's dangerous. And oh my God, I don't want to hear your whatever because it's going to rub off on me.
Yeah, it's contagious. Yeah.
So the person can't actually make themselves feel positive and whatever, because their psyche is trying to give them a helpful message.
Yeah.
But then what you've added to it is they feel guilty and worse about themselves because they have these feelings that the world tells them they're not supposed to have, that their psyche is trying to use to help them. And what happens? They get more depressed, and we have a mental health crisis. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but
That is true. And we shame them. We make it even worse by adding shame onto the the already pain and discomfort and difficulty that they're dealing with, which is the worst possible thing that you could do.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm screaming into the microphone.
No, but you're right. No, but it's because I know that you feel frustration of watching people suffer.
I do.
Needlessly. I mean, when that's
I really do.
the science tells us that that's like the exact opposite, but we are kind of trapped in that. I even feel like when we're watching, if you're at this point and you're watching financial television, say, it's like you feel guilty if you're not doing well and you haven't made money. You feel like an idiot if you haven't figured it out because everybody else is smarter, and if you didn't sell at the right time and you didn't pick the bottom, and there's even the messaging around that sort of, I think, adds to our sense of discomfort instead of kind of breaking it down. I don't think that's the intention, but that's how I think a lot of people are left feeling like, this is impossible to fit. I'm never going to get this right because I'm not good at this and other people are. And, and then they are fearful.
Most human beings, to some degree or another, and some very, very little, and some way too much, are like, am I doing it well enough? Essentially to keep up with the crowd. But like at its core, it's like, am I going to be safe? Because is my crowd still going to love me? Like, am I still going to have a tribe? But we'd deny that exists. I mean, surely it can go to an extreme where you're so too worried about where do you fit in and what do people think of you. But there's some little core piece of that that's just innate in human nature, because we sort of know we can't survive completely on our own. And so then you take things like financial television or social media, and it just exacerbates the worry that I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Your imposter syndrome, right? You're not good enough and you're not going to be able to figure it out. Everybody else has it figured out, which is, again, you pointed out, is us sort of negatively looking at looking at ourselves through a negative lens that isn't accurate and most of the time not true. I think this message about, and you and I have talked about this before, but I think this message about being able to sort of face that and being uncomfortable or in a place of discomfort for a little while is freeing, actually. Those negative feelings are not to be avoided, but it actually is going to help put you in a better spot. What can we leave people with because I sense that this is going to be a difficult year. We kind of know there are things ahead. Doesn't mean it's all going to end in flames, but there are just a lot of things to worry about and navigate through. It feels like going into this year. It feels like it's still going to be a tough road. But what can we leave people with? What would you like them to think about as they kind of turn the corner and think about 2023? As a way to kind of mentally prepare and think about how they can face this in a healthier way, maybe.
Well, it is a difficult year. I mean, that's just a fact. Life is always difficult, but this year is more difficult than at least if you're involved in markets, this has been a more difficult market to make money in for everyone. Like, so at first just accept that, and then I think it's probably safe to say for anyone who's listening at this point, you're too self-critical. Like, your beliefs about yourself are skewed to the negative, and it's not helping you because you're getting more upset about the worst part of that. And the worst part of it's probably not even true. So that's like, okay, could you maybe try to be more accurate? Like, okay, how do you do that? By getting data on your actual decisions. I'm just going to say, give yourself a break and say, like, what if you were your child and you were trying to help your child, like, understand the reality of their performance? You probably wouldn't be as hard on your child as you would on you. Unless, of course, you're just acting out on each other. That's a whole other beyond the scope of this podcast.
We're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. They wouldn't be as hard.
We're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. But I can tell you from sitting in this chair that, like, all kinds of people who manage, $1 billion or $10 billion, like, they're not that different than the average trader, since they're really not. What generally happened is they got college degrees and they had something that got them into the asset management business. And then they were mentored by somebody who was already doing it, and then that landed them with this 6-7 figure job managing, these $1 billion portfolios. They do the same stuff. Like, they make the same mistakes. They may have a better understanding of, like, how all the global macro factors interact and, like, what some obscure currency is going to do. Like, if interest rates, okay, fine, but they still have to trade it.
Yeah.
And they have real vision to learn that stuff.
No, that I think that's great advice. And don't be afraid of sort of facing some of the negative stuff instead of carrying it around or pushing it off. Just sit down with it for a little while and find your way from there.
Here's a book, actually. This book's been out for a while. It's called The Upside of Your Dark Side. There's 2 authors, Todd Kashdan and somebody, Das de Wiener, but it's a German name that I can't actually pronounce. Or at least I think it's German. The Upside of Your Dark Side, though. Google it. It's on Amazon.
That's fantastic. Denise, I always love when I get a chance to sit down with you. I always learn so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
A truly fascinating interview there with industry heavyweight Denise Shull and Maggie Lake. And now I'd like to share my key takeaways with you. First of all, Denise says we all have to recognize that 2022 was an incredibly tough year for investors, so you just need to give yourself a break. She explains that the brain is always predicting, so when the future starts to get close, you start to think about it more than the here and now. That's why we tend to put things off until the new year, because we feel like we're already living in the holiday season. But as she explained to one of her clients, this time of year is not a write-off. There's an opportunity to make money and get positioned for 2023. She thinks it's important to sit down and feel your negative feelings, and once you can accept them, it's easier to work through them. And finally, perhaps most importantly, she thinks you're probably being too hard on yourself. She says if you take the time to sit down and analyze your investments and trades, it's probably not nearly as bad as you think.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.